understanding as CEO what your role is and also what you want, and in a complementary sense, what you want from your CTO and your COO, you know, how you all fit together. My name is Alex Schlagman. I'm co-founder and CEO of Collex Connect Limited. We trade as savethehighstreet.org and joinjoe.com. We're an industry-wide movement and an AI assistant on a mission to transform and strengthen high streets.
So how did this all start? Why did you start this business?
So, I mean, I've grown up in this space. My family was in retail from various different sides. I'd always been fascinated with how the internet is local, not just global. My first tech business was a bit like Gumtree for students. How do we connect people commercially without having to send things all around the world? And in 2013-14, there was a lot of energy in the media around what they call the death of the high street. And I thought we were basically on the cusp of one of those great contrarian truths, because while certain forms of retail were being heavily disrupted and may not play a role in the future, the concept of high streets, the places where we live and interact in the real world, you know, the experience economy, you know, much more beyond just product retail, had a big role to play in the future. And I didn't believe it was right. And I didn't believe that people would be willing to keel over and let that happen. So I thought there was a big opportunity to take a thesis, which was effectively, we need to transform and change the high street, not accept it going to die. And ultimately, the death knell in the high street, which was innovation and technology, for me, was the big opportunity for enablement and reimagining, you know, the world's second largest sector after manufacturing, which is local commerce.
I'd be interested to get your view on what the real threat on the high street is. So I think from an outsider's perspective, someone that's not really in this industry, a lot of people are talking about the internet and how that's really threatening the high street. When I talk to a lot of people that are on the high street, they're saying actually it's the high rents that are killing them more than anything. So what's your view on that?
I mean, there's a few different sides to what's going on here, but, you know, firstly, let's put this in perspective here. The biggest online-only retailers in the world all have high street in their strategy. So it's not saying fundamental around that. Amazon's been testing concept stores for the last 5 years. They've recently launched into London quite publicly. You know, in Asia, Alibaba is a big connected network, as is Rakuten, of local businesses, and it's omni-channel at the core. You know, eBay partnered with Argos, the largest, you know, growth stories in pure play niche online retail have all been experimenting with pop-ups and connections into the omni-channel space. So it's not fundamentally brick and mortar, which is the problem per se. And actually all the big online operations are looking at ways to connect up the journey from online to offline and from offline to online, because that's where, you know, a lot of the consumer growth has been. But ultimately, there's certain things that need to change. And so a big part of our remit at the moment is we're taking over vacant spaces and filling them with a new generation of startups to fill the gaps left by large national chains disappearing from the high street. And what we're looking at, and as you touched on here with rents and other cost bases, is how do we reduce the friction to getting businesses onto the high street? When you spin up an online business, and you're looking to sell something through Shopify, you can launch it in 5 minutes, you can close it down 5 minutes later. The old economic model of selling on high streets and in shopping centers around the world has been, you take a lease for 5, 10, 15, even 20 years. So that kind of lack of flexibility and that ability to be dynamic has really hurt the high street economy. And so we're looking at interesting ways to change that, providing businesses with access to space and support to get set up with basically the ability to walk after 4 weeks if it's not working, or the ability to join license agreements, almost like subscription as a service for the high street, where they're paying on an ongoing basis and their performance is linked in some way to how much they pay. So much more of a partnership between landlord and tenant, like almost, again, bringing some digital analogies in here, treating the sort of the landlord in a way as the publisher and the merchant selling in that space as the affiliate, in an affiliate network type space. And actually, they're a partnership. and they bring business to each other, and they share in the rewards rather than it being just a pure flat fee. So I think there were certain old ways that people expected that landlord-tenant to work, which have needed to change. And because of a lot of the pain points that have happened over the last year, particularly with COVID-19, it's accelerated some of the things that we were looking to do, such as reimagining old department stores into interesting indoor markets full of businesses, you know, who are basically on that type of model, much more flexible turnover linked or performance linked agreements, and much more small businesses replacing the gaps left by the big guys.
Absolutely. And with the people that you're dealing with in the different organizations, I suppose just about everyone can see there needs to be more flexibility within this space, but the attitudes must be different whether you're talking to landlords, big retailers, independent shops. So how does that vary between everyone?
It's a really good question, actually, James. So attitudinal change has been one of the big things that we've been working on. So in 2016, we launched an industry-wide movement called SaveTheHighstreet.org. We were already a technology startup. We were building technology to empower the high streets of the future. And we found ourselves in a position, and I was introduced to a framework for launching these sort of movements, where we can sort of build something where everyone can play a role in, you know, delivering on a future vision in a market. So, you know, one of the big focuses we looked at there was how do we start to change the attitudes, because we have reach and influence now. You know, we do hundreds of media appearances a year. You know, we've got a wide distribution network of supporters across the whole ecosystem related to high streets. We're in a position to influence that change. And one of the big things to touch on is attitudes. So on the business level, the high street business owner level, a lot of high street businesses are working in their business, not on their business. They're probably not what you would class an entrepreneur in a way. They're just trading. You know, they're waiting for business to walk through the door. You know, they're passionate about what they offer, but they're not continuously iterating and improving on what they need to do and making sure they are future-proofed and as successful as possible. So getting the mindset of the business owner to start with into the space of saying, I need to be working every day to improve my business, not just in my business. And so that's a big thing. From a real estate market point of view, I think very interesting dynamics over the last year and a half. So as I said, we launched SaveTheHighstreet.org in 2016. We had lots and lots of support early on from high street businesses, what we call local champions, who are anyone who's living and breathing success on their own high streets. You know, the community groups, the traders associations, the business improvement districts. We had support and initial early partnerships with local government. We had lots of media support, but actually it was a very quiet first couple of years from a real estate point of view. And we were very reactive at this point here because we were flooded with inquiries and we were just dealing with what we had. But actually it became apparent to us that we hadn't had any inquiries from developers and landlords and agents and people with the real estate hat on. The last year and a half has changed substantially. It's completely turned on its head. And partly it's just to do with the economics. You know, the old ways have stopped working. They're no longer connecting rent. The businesses that have what they call strong covenant strength, which is basically low risk in the simplest sense, in terms of a tenant coming into a space, and typically the big brands that you knew, those businesses with strong covenants, they are going out of business very publicly. They're going into administration. And if they're not going to administration, sometimes they're doing tactical administrations on particular units they call CVAs, and they're reducing their store footprints and passing the pain onto the landlords. So it suddenly became clear that, you know, actually we're all in this together. It's a symbiotic relationship. Landlords, tenants, and what we call lenders as well are in a tripartite relationship. And if the Titanic goes down, it takes everyone with us. And so that shift in attitudes about actually we need to play a role and we need to do things differently has really come to life when it comes to the real estate market. Government support, you know, has always been there. There's always been something interesting going on since we started this. And I didn't come from a public sector background, but we've ended up with lots of partnerships across local government, good relations into central government as well. And we've sort of learned about that side of the equation here. But this is very much a public-private sector collaboration piece to get through this challenge and reimagine the high street positively. And in the last year and a half, there's been tons of support that's being thrown to the high street very publicly to do with grants, but also behind the scenes, lots of new interventions and lots of new funding available to local government to make a difference on their high street. And we're supporting a lot of those councils, bids, and local enterprise partnerships to make that happen.
And within smaller stores, do you find certain sectors are more difficult to get on board with this? So for me, the one that springs to mind are companies like small jewelers, for instance, which quite often are generational businesses and they're quite resistant to change. Do you find certain stores are more difficult to get on board than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think naturally, I mean, from in terms of our journey here, so we had the sort of the wider movement. We had a platform before the movement kicked off, and then we pivoted to what has become Joe, which is the digital assistant for local businesses. And when we've been rolling out Joe, we've found there's definitely certain segmentation of the businesses that really jump at the opportunity to be on this, and the businesses that want to get involved in this but can't get as much value as the others, and the businesses that are kind of resistant. Sometimes it's less to do with sector. There are certain insights that we picked up, less jewelry, I would say. So, I mean, you mentioning you moved from Twickenham. We've got a lot of engagement going on down in Richmond as a borough, Twickenham Church Street, Barnes, and there's a couple of actually early case studies of real success stories on the Joe platform in and around that region. One of which was a jeweler, was one of our earliest big case studies. The convenience space has been quite an interesting one because lots of opportunities there, but sometimes quite hard to crack the independent convenience stores. But I think the bigger segmentation interest is around the attitudes. We find that some younger entrepreneurial businesses that are really setting up to be successful, are typically jumping on the opportunity to really take their business to the next level and achieve their potential through the Joe platform. And there are historically, particularly before this year, COVID-19 has helped us get into these markets more, but historically, we found it hard to crack some of the older generations who are sort of, okay, I'm going through the motions, even though, I'm certainly not an omni-channel business. I haven't got a social media profile. I'm not even claiming my Google My Business listing, let alone selling online and doing all kinds of things we knew businesses need to be doing, and we're supporting businesses in achieving. They were resistant to change. And so for us, the hardest part was often not so much having a direct competitor in our market. We built a unique space. It's the first AI assistant for small high street businesses. We've got cut-through distribution. We've got brand loyalty, all of this good stuff. But actually, our competition was do nothing and actually stay as you are. And whether or not you're paying for it yourself as a subscription on Joe, or whether your council's funding your subscription, which is happening increasingly in the UK now, businesses sometimes were still resistant to taking on that change. And it's a behavioral economics thing. It's an emotional thing. It's like, I don't want to change, even though it might be right for my business. And that's often the hardest segment for us.
I'm quite interested to hear about the process between launching the different brands under the umbrella company. What was the sort of decision-making process behind that, rather than just have it all under one brand, grow how it's known? I know a lot of founders are grappling with this at the moment in their own minds, whether to split brands or not. So it'd be great to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, so I didn't start the business with a view we were going to set up an umbrella company. I started the business with just the me and my co-founders' names and Connect. It was all about connecting local commerce, and we went through our own process for the first few months of kind of iterating in the market. We had a big thesis, which is basically changing the high street is one of the great economic and social impact opportunities of our time, and that basically at the core of it, we're going to build technology and data-driven technology, because we were data people. Colin, the co-founder, is data scientist. I come from a data background as well, and that data was going to play a big role within this. But we didn't have necessarily a product or a brand that we brought to market. When we did come to market, and we found problem solution fit through our initial testing process, we brought to market basically an online click and collect app back in 2014-15. So the really sort of early days of this, before you know, there was any kind of retail type offerings around this. All the delivery apps were starting to emerge in food delivery. But we believe that everything on the high street should be available as quick as a takeaway pizza. Everything should be as easily discoverable as a Google search. And so we started basically building integrations into third-party EPOS systems and bringing together basically an aggregated view of high streets that you could search and order things for collection or delivery. And so we launched a brand around that proposition, which was Pocket High Street. And Pocket High Street had an initial entry strategy within bike shops, but the vision was to build basically an Amazon alternative for the high street. Yeah, with that kind of breadth of offering. And so we had a brand in market called Pocket High Street. It already sort of pivoted into more of a platform play. We were starting to allow people to access our data and build things on the API and access the data to build third-party shopping experiences. And I was introduced to a framework for launching industry movements, to cut a long story short, by another lady who was thinking about launching her own industry movement to empower women in business, and was also very passionate in the retail world. We had a lot of partnerships already. We were already a business of belonging. The early PR that got behind us was all about the why, not the what. And we looked at it and we said, look, you know, there is a space for this in this market right now, but is the space for it to be launching it as Pocket High Street, or is the space to launching a movement to set up a separate brand that everybody can buy into and be a part of? So for us, it was a bit of a no-brainer. I bought SaveTheHighstreet.org as a domain, and you know, it felt like a coherent fit. We actually had quite a lot of debates about it because our big thesis is change the high street.org, if you like, not save the old. It's transition to the new. But you know, ultimately, you know, we went with it. You know, in startups, you've got to make things happen. You've got to be decisive about things. We had conviction around it all, and we launched a second brand. And suddenly, we're sat there with two brands. It was really that simple. We didn't carefully plan it out. A few months after we'd launched SaveTheHighstreet.org, it became increasingly apparent, I'll cut a long story short, the biggest problem in this space needed to be solved by what's become Joe. And we had tons of insight. We'd set up a research group called the High Street Advisory Board. We were doing lots of research into what works for high street businesses, what the problems are, what they need. And ultimately, they need access to a team of experts. They need, you know, in an ideal world, McKinsey running a change management program. They want Mindshare doing their media and Ogilvy doing their advertising and PwC running their accounts, but they can't afford this. So we need to remove humans, and we need to build a digital version of a smart assistant that can give you recommendations, learn about your business so they're continuously improving, and be like a concierge to put things in practice that you need help on, educate you on the things you want to do yourself, and outsource the things that you want to get done by other people. So we realized there was just a much bigger opportunity than what the Pocket High Street platform was. And as we started building this out, it wasn't branded. We did an initial pilot with some government funding around the whole thing to basically test out manually more what Joe would become. And then we started basically, we went for a 12-month beta exercise with 300 businesses before it even had a brand. And it just in that process, I felt very, very strongly that I wanted it to have a human persona. I wanted it to have a much more sort of feeling of a, like a Siri or a Cortana or an Einstein, or, there's lots of these digital assistants, Watsons, that have emerged with much more human persona. We wanted to be the sort of what Einstein's doing for salespeople, but for the high street business. And so, for us, we wanted a human persona around it all. One of my lead investors had always said, why do you always take these brands? Why do you always launch these brands with very long names? SaveTheHighstreet.org, PocketHighstreet.com. Why have you got these very long names? Short names is what works, isn't it? And so I ended up with a two-letter name in Joe, and joinjoe.com. And I was just like, look, let's go with it. So it wasn't as sophisticated. It wasn't that complicated. It was basically, we were just in action. We were doing the things that felt right for our business, aligned to our mission. And we've ended up with those three brands. Now we've got to that point, we have this view of a kind of portfolio, and we've got this big mission around transforming the high street. And we believe there's an opportunity to build one of the, the generation's great businesses off the back of it. And that could include other brands. We can spin up other things because of it. But it really isn't that complicated. You have the limited company and you can trade as different brands. You just need the right protections for it.
And with all this development then and the launch of the three separate brands, what's this done to your day-to-day role as the founder? How do you split your time?
So I mean, in the early days, you're involved in everything, and so I found if I look back, my COO and myself were actually both of us almost involved in everything, literally, and it was kind of our energy that was really driving a lot of this forward. Um, and I think really one of the big things for me, I don't know if it's necessarily related to the different brands, but is around really understanding as CEO what your role is and also what you want, and in a complementary sense, what you want from your CTO and your COO. How you all fit together, I think is often very important. So a few things that have really changed for me is I was never a particularly good manager. I led from the front, I led in action. I just did things. I expected people to follow. I expected people to be leaders themselves. But I found actually that I'd recruited some particularly impressive market development leaders. And I went through three different top people in the industry who'd come on board, really enrolled in the vision, big players in that space, but real leaders. And I found that in reality, looking back on it, I brought in the best people and I hadn't given them the space to execute. I'd basically just told them what to do. And by the end of it, they were just basically just following what I was telling them to do. And it was a complete waste, and it doesn't scale. And so since then, one of the big things I've learned is to basically step back and trust, bring in the best people, give them the support you need. I mean, I have a standard thing that I always say to people at almost every level, whenever anyone's responsible for a part of the business, I always say that I work for you, not the other way around. I'm now a useful resource in your team. You call on me for when you need help, whether that's direction or whether that is implementation or whether that's extra resource. I now work for you. And so that shift was a big one for me. Rather than me being involved in everything, really directing and driving everything and just getting people in to just fill the gaps, to being actually building a team that can scale and working for them. And then I think similarly with COO, CTO, just going back to that previous point, it's about finding that right dynamic and what you want. So on a personal level, for me, I've found myself very much at the front end when it comes to anything to do with evangelizing the brand, PR, the stuff that's next. What's happening next that's outside of the core? I'll go and set up this whole thing around reimagining department stores and then pass it on to a team. I'll set up the vacant unit offering and pass it on. I'll be looking, how do we move into new markets? How do we do new things and then pass it on? So I'm almost like the what's next, whereas my COO is running the what now. And he's running that whole operation with people dedicated to different parts of the organization. And finding that balance, I think, has been important. But I think ultimately you've got to be honest with yourself, and you've got to be honest with your senior C-suite team about what is it you actually want to do. You're going to be spending a ridiculous amount of time every day for a long period of time on this. How do you find that honest, true view about what it is that you want to do in your business and what other people want to do? And some CEOs, are very big and they want to evangelize and they want to fundraise and they're happy to hand off management of the business to other people. Other CEOs want to be intimately involved in all management. Other CEOs become much more product centered and let go of everything else and have a business person running the operations. But I think it's ultimately down to, you individually as a founder and your founding team to decide what it is you actually want to do and then commit to that.
And it must be internally an exciting time at the moment with Highstreet's now opening back up and retail coming back to life. So what's next for the business? What do the next 6 to 12 months look like?
So, I mean, we're really focused around transforming the high street from the bottom up. And there's 500,000 units in the UK, give or take 5,000 individual high street areas. And we're basically trying to address the UK market. We're trying to make sure that the Joe platform is in place for every single occupied unit. So every single local business has a version of a digital assistant that's helping, track and develop and implement a plan with them. And then vacant units, we want to fill the vacant units with a new generation of entrepreneurs that will on the Joe platform from day one, so that they've got the support and space they need to succeed. And then these bigger units, we want to sort of reimagine them in partnership with developers and other entrepreneurs. So, we're quite focused in that sense there. We often seen, because of the movement, we're seeing some people think we're lobbyists. I wouldn't call ourselves lobbyists, but we're definitely campaigners, loudmouths. We'll get involved in the scene and, we want to be a part of the positive change. But really our focus is unit by unit, high street by high street, how do we transform this market from the bottom up? And the reality is all the pressures now, that have been going on, COVID and prior, are basically forces to change. So, we're just really keen that we address this opportunity in front of us, and that we do our best to build a really special business that returns capital to our shareholders, as well as driving the positive impact in the world, because we're an ESG business, as they call them. So we've got this wider implication. Our success drives positive impact on the wider local economy and communities and future entrepreneurship and all of these good things. So, we've got our own measures around just making sure we nail it. I'm going to be setting up a larger fundraise. So it's one of the things that I still do and lead in the business, is very much the fundraising. There's sort of nobody else individually who in the business really drives that. It's very much me. So I'm really looking at how do we partner with the right investors to really address this opportunity, and really how do we scope this, because we've got a core business now which is nice and it's set up and we can kind of run with this, but actually it's such a tumultuous time in high street economy that there's all kinds of new opportunities that if you applied capital with access to data and access to the market that we've got, you can start to do some really interesting things, start buying up high streets, start setting up a new generation of businesses ourselves, maybe even an incubator. So there's lots of sort of frontier type opportunities that if we had access to the capital, we could do some interesting things with. But yeah, definitely on my path here is definitely a big fundraising, and thinking about beyond the UK. How do we apply what we're doing to other markets?
Very exciting, and I'm sure this is going to pique the interest of a lot of those listening to this session. So, for those listening, where can they find out more about Save the High Street as well as the Joe platform and yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, if people are listening in and they want to connect with me about something specific, feel free to sort of add me on LinkedIn and just say you'd seen this and mind, answer a question or something like that. SaveTheHighstreet.org, the website. Is probably worth having a look at if you've got an interest in this market, particularly. If you're building something that you think can empower high streets in the future, we collaborate with lots and lots of we're called supplier partners, who are building interesting things that we can get into the Joe platform and start offering to businesses across the high street, provide you with the distribution you need to, get reach for your loyalty app or your HR tool or whatever you think you can help small local businesses with. It's probably worth reaching out to us via SaveTheHighstreet.org. And if you're listening in and you're an investor and you want to have a chat to me directly and hear more about sort of upcoming funding opportunities, then drop me a line direct, probably on LinkedIn as well.